Very warm good afternoon to all of you. I am Karan Singh, Marketing Manager with UIncept. Welcome you all to the first masterclass of All India EdTech Challenge and Masterclass Series 2021-2022, which is powered by Amazon Web Services EdStart with ecosystem partner Atal Innovation Mission. UIncept is an EdTech focused startup accelerator which has supported more than 40 startups, mostly in the EdTech space and through its mentorship program and we have helped the startups to raise more than $12 million. The program does offer state-of-the-art co-working space, complimentary Wi-Fi, expert mentorship, value-added perks worth more than $25,000, networking events, access to mentors and investor network, and much more. Well, without any further ado, I would like to welcome Ms. Deepika Sharma, who's leading the AWS EdStart for India at Amazon Web Services, for the welcome. Over to you, Deepika.
Thank you, Karan. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So what a warm group. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for this warm welcome as well, Karan. My name is Deepika Sharma. I am currently based out of Hyderabad, and I've played a small part in building and driving this All India EdTech Challenge for aspiring and existing EdTech entrepreneurs from India. Now, to answer your question on why we are here today, let me try to answer it in a more visionary manner. The vision behind putting this piece together. So, national policies like National Education Policy (NEP), Atal Ranking of Institutions on Innovation Achievements (ARIIA), and National Innovation and Startup Policy 2019 for students and faculty called NISP are fueling innovation in higher education institutions. And we wanted to accelerate this by partnering with the broader incubation ecosystem of India, including the Atal incubation centers. Our purpose and intent is to help provide a structure of building your first EdTech startup through our pre-MVP masterclasses. Over the next few months, you will build your EdTech idea into a prototype from which the top prototypes get a chance to receive seed funds from UIncept, along with guidance from Atal Innovation Mission and infrastructure and technical support from AWS EdStart. I'm assuming that all of you, by now know what EdStart is, but in a short manner, it's Amazon Web Services Virtual Accelerator Program for EdTech startups. We encourage you to leverage the resources provided to you as part of these masterclasses so that we can make this experience super duper impactful for you. Thank you and all the very best. Over to you, Karan.
Thank you so much, Deepika. That was indeed a great welcome and definitely something which all these startups can definitely look forward to. Next, I would like to introduce our mentor for today's session, Mr. Rohit Swarup, who's the corporate mentor, founder, and director of Explora Education. He has been contributing to various Indian state government on employment generation projects through education and help creating Center of Excellence, research and development centers, and incubators, accelerators in the areas of management, technology, especially in the emerging technology areas and design. We welcome you, Mr. Rohit Swarup.
Indeed a pleasure. Yeah, greetings and pleasure, Karan and Deepika. So greetings, friends, and greatly appreciate the efforts of UIncept as well as Amazon Group in this specific domain. It's indeed a pleasure to see that how we are nurturing the innovation ecosystem in our country and specifically in the EdTech space. I've been, when I started my venture, it was almost 22 years back. And it was a classroom project of second year management education. And that turned out to be our initiative. It took roots and grew from one campus based in Ahmedabad to numerous campuses in India, China, UK, and Canada now. So I'm familiar with education. When I started, of course, it was not called a startup. It used to be a classic business that one would take up. In fact, the first loan, many of us would understand that we get our fundings and we look forward to fundings. Our funding, which is loan, came after actually we really needed it. So possibly we saw the entire journey of the first 18 months that how can one bootstrap and survive on one's own. Beyond that, of course, I've been part of some of the teams supporting Atal Innovation Mission, good friends there. So we do classic design clinics with the incubators and community centers there. So today's session is interesting because why I say interesting is masterclass is generally considered to be full of knowledge, tools, and techniques. So what makes this session interesting for me is that when we go through these series of masterclass, we'll be trying to either create a hypothesis or an assumption and prove ourselves correct, or we will be seeking out to identify that what are the new avenues, problems, and possibilities that we could possibly look at. And many of you must be familiar with the methodology of design, pedagogy or design approach, also called sometimes design thinking or a human-centric approach, which is being taken up widely across the world as a method for nurturing startup and growing startups. So what we would follow is therefore an approach that combines design thinking, lean and agile, and try to, if some of you are familiar with the term of Scrum, then I would appreciate that some of us could actually put this entire exercise through a Scrum and quickly try to derive our meanings at each stage of a startup. So having said that, the first session, basically the introduction, I would like to focus on setting the ground rules and doing some bit of an exploration that all of us would want to justify. So let's begin with a very quick question. And let's, and because I treat all sessions as workshops. So for me, there is no one-sided monologue that should happen. I mean, that era I personally believe is over. You know, we are in an era of quick doing something, learning from it, both the sides. So I learn equally from what you are doing and likewise. And then let's keep building the body of knowledge. So let's begin the first exercise by saying that what's the interesting question pertaining? Most of us as startups start with a question mark that we are entering into a domain which is quite uncertain. And of course, to add to the complexity of the current world situation, which we call VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And many of us must be familiar with this term because it applies to education to a big extent, also to other domains. But when we talk of education, things are changing so fast that one message, or like if I was to say that if Amazon was to say that we are going to get into a serious school business, half of the schools in the world would look up and say that, oh, let's think about here what could be the consequences of that one sentence. The same happens in other industries in the same manner. So when we begin with an uncertainty, we generally call this a knowledge funnel. Some of you must be familiar with that term, but what the term says is that how can we build a body of knowledge as we progress in our startup? So, and it's a funnel. So it would look classically like a funnel where we zero down upon things. So where do we begin this funnel? And let me give you an interesting example of how interestingly we can look at this funnel and a mystery. So we begin with a mystery where there is unknown. And let's look at an example of almost 100 years back. And I'm trying to give this example because I personally find that it is so very interesting when an organization tries to look at a mystery from a completely different world domain. So let's take an example of McDonald's, and I'm sure all of us are familiar. So I'm taking that as an analogy for some of our startups. Uh, I would also appreciate, friends, if some of us can switch on our videos because it becomes a little interactive. Otherwise, I'll have to go by Karan's body expression and facial expression. And having said that, it could be leading and misleading both, because we know each other for quite some time. So taking the example of McDonald's, let's see that how, and let's treat McDonald's from the era I'm talking about as a startup. So they had a couple of restaurants and they wanted to build further restaurants across the world. So the challenge that they were trying to solve is, where should we open our restaurants? What location should we choose? What kind of a food should we present? So while they were doing this, it's a natural extension that when we are in EdTech, we would of course look at an EdTech ecosystem and try to crack that education ecosystem and say, where can we learn from? But let's appreciate, where did McDonald's look at? So what did McDonald's say is, what are the rising trends in our country? And one of the key rising trends in United States at that moment was the selling of Ford motors. So the Ford motors and the Ford cars were beginning to sell in United States. Now, think about it. As education startups, if I was to tell you that we will need to look at something as diverse as what's happening in a film industry or what's happening in an automobile industry, many of us will discount that why are we looking at such a broad horizon? But look at what McDonald's did. When they looked at what's happening to United States, they say Ford Motors are selling a lot of Model T, and America has started to travel. Now, we all are familiar that when we buy a vehicle and when we want to travel, where would we want to go? So if we talk about ourselves, we would want to visit our relatives in India or possibly go to a religious place. When travel started in United States, people wanted to go to holidays, to beach resorts. Now, what McDonald thought is that if we take this trend that America is traveling, so from where to where do people travel? So where do I put my restaurant that it could serve people while they are on the move? Now, let's also look at one interesting thing, that when people are traveling from their cities to beaches, they'll follow a pattern, and all of us in that condition would want to reach our destination in time. So we are not starting from our place and saying, okay, we'll stop on the way and keep enjoying ourselves. We say, I have to reach that location because I booked myself there in time. So it poses the next question. If people will not have time on the way, and if people would want to pack things on the way and move ahead, what kind of a food should we be serving? So that brings another chapter here, that the menu of McDonald's was governed by a trend which was completely from a different industry. Now let's extrapolate that even further. They calculated that at what time would people be stopping over to have a quick meal before they reach their destination, so somewhere midway. Now, what does this tell us, friends? I mean, why I'm sharing this example, because whenever I hear this myself, I mean, when I hear it myself speaking also, it opens so many avenues for us to look at in terms of a domain, that what kind of trends, practices, and when I say global or local practices, what kind of cultural centrist practices are taking place in different parts of the world, and are we able to leverage upon the same? So when we talk about startups, the first thought that crosses me is, are we looking at what kind of landscape are we looking at? Are we looking at cross trends that are intersecting with each other across the world in order to make some sense out of it? So with that as a context, let me share my screen if everyone is comfortable, and I'll show you the knowledge funnel and how McDonald's at each step took their enterprise from a mystery to a heuristic. So some of us who are familiar with AI would definitely know that mystery to heuristics to an algorithm to a code is a progression that we take in AI. Now, for startup, what does that mean? For a startup, it means is, are we able to make sense out of a mystery which is out there? And of course, many of us who would crack that well and have a good value proposition would definitely, of course, have a good startup. But what it also tells us is that, is there a scientific approach to startup creation? And can we map our startups against this scientific approach? So let's begin with the first question that I would pose to each one of you. And since I see that it's a very small group, we are like 15 people here, we can make it quite interactive and interesting. So let us say that if we are looking at our startup, so if there is a mystery out there, what kind of trends have we identified for our startups that we think we can piggy bank on, or we think will definitely catapult our startup in a certain domain? And I'm not saying that all of us would have our trends and outlined, but let's give it a thought for a minute. And some of you can share that what kind of a trends that you want to piggy bank on when we want to leverage and take our startup to the next stage quickly. That's one question. Let's think on that. The second one I want also for us to ponder upon is, what are the kind of mystery situations that we will encounter as a startup? So when we look at a startup, it's quite easy to say that, okay, we are going to provide the skill for the country, or we are going to provide an ABC kind of a platform, or we'll provide a pedagogy. Now that's easier said than done, because when we look at a mystery outside, the mystery could be multi-level and both horizontally and vertically. Now, what I mean here is there are different boards of education. Within the different boards, there are different ways in which we evaluate the criteria. Along with evaluation, we have different expectations from different stakeholders in the ecosystem. Now, when all of these becomes variables, the whole ecosystem looks little bit of a mystery. So let's, each one of us, I pose 3 trends that we think that we can piggy bank upon. Now, if we have not thought about it, no worries. Here is the time that we can think. I give you a very, very off example of McDonald's, because to just set a tone that we could be as diverse at what McDonald's looked at. But let's take up some examples and see 3 trends that we may want to piggy bank on, and 3 mysteries that we feel are quite interesting to look at from our startup perspective. Now, it may not be that we are solving those right now. It could be mysteries that we may want to solve as we go along, or these could be the mysteries that have intrigued us to a certain extent. Let's hear from some of us. I'll open the forum, and I'll keep it very informal to an extent that whoever can grab the mic first can begin, so we don't land up into formalities. Looking forward to hearing something from our friends here.
Okay, I'll go first. This is Avinash here. So
yes, Avinash.
What I've been in EdTech for last 14, 15 years. I've been doing more of a traditional ERP software and online assessment. What we have seen in last couple years since pandemic, that the technology which wasn't being used that frequently or to that level in EdTech sector, specifically the schools, K-12 schools, there were teachers who were like diehard blackboard and chalk teachers. Now they had shifted to online. And this was because they didn't have a choice. And when they did that, there was a level setting that yes, they can do it. And the initial friction was there, but since it was for last 2 years, slowly people gotten used to it, including the teachers, right? Other thing that has happened is a level playing field. Earlier, it was just the big teachers and their reach. If you take an example, somebody who is out of Indore, they had their, let's talk about coaching. So they had only the local students. But with technology and with the pandemic, what has happened is anybody who is good, okay, they can reach out to anybody across India. So that is another change that has happened. Other thing what we have seen is that the typical add-ons or the extracurricular activities or the contests that people had. Like I've been working with people conducting English contest or the Vedic math contest or similar things which were happening in schools on OMR. Now that has shifted to online. And since they were working, because it was online on offsite in schools, they had the limitations that they could do only this much because the scaling factor of it. But because it has gone online, we have helped several contest organizers to reach out across India. In fact, some in Dubai and Qatar and other places. So what we are seeing is that, of course, there was a change in last couple years that people have started moving to use technology, and even the acceptance has increased. The typical traditional schools will say no for mobiles or no for the online things. They had to accept this, and I have few examples wherein the contest these businesses were dead, and so we helped them enable the entire thing because they were
Excellent.
not used to the online thing. They were doing complete offline OMR printed question paper based things.
Excellent, Avinash ji. Excellent. So I think Avinash ji has set the tone, and let's applause for being. I still am little old-fashioned, so still consider that Sachin Tendulkar would always be my opening batsman. So let's appreciate his initiative of beginning the session there. Now let's take Avinash ji's case, and I think we should treat our master classes like this, and we'll pick up a case and then have a further exploration on it. From what Avinash ji said, he mentioned three specific trends. Now, I would be happy to hear someone come up with a completely tangential trend that could help him. Now, then let me give you what I mean by that. Can we identify a human trend that is sweeping the world, some kind of socio-economic, cultural, uh, uh, psychological uh, kind of trend that is sweeping uh, both our country or the world? Can we look at something like that, or like something what Simon Sinek? I'm sure many of us have heard Simon Sinek. If not, then my recommendation, one person definitely to listen to in context of education. Besides, of course, Ken Robinson, we miss him quite a bit in today's time. But if we look at that, can anyone suggest a kind of a cultural, behavioral, child development trend that we see is actually going to shake the world in the future or pose opportunities? We have Deepika here. So Deepika wishes to answer.
Yes, yes, we have
Yes,
the.
I will be the student who raises her hand, right, in the class, Rohit. But great points. I think I kind of, while listening to the previous answer, I was thinking through, and there is definitely an upcoming trend on two areas. One is investment in the pre-K studies, right? That's basically very strongly emerging. And while we are thinking through that, social emotional learning, that's the world is going gaga about it, right? There's so much investment happening in that place because we are seeing students not being, socially emotionally learning and being equipped. So I think that's one trend I
Oh,
would highlight
fantastic.
here.
Fantastic, Deepika. Greatly appreciate that from the context that when we talk about sometime we take devices as and gadgets as evils, but for a generation that is born with those gadgets, is it really wise to call it an evil, or is it wise to call an extension of their own self? Now, of course, when we look at it and when we talk of this in education, there are possibly five generations under the same roof. If five generations have five different value systems and pattern of thinking and ways in which they approach to solve and address things, it could be equally challenging and pose interesting opportunities for us. We have Saurav who wishes to share something. Yes, Saurav, please.
Right. So one of the factors which I wanted to bring here is again aligned with the fact that COVID was pretty long drawn out, wave one, wave two, wave three. So as a result of that, what might happen is students across the board, and not only students but even outside of that, they will start learning from non-traditional sources, and that is where the traditional setup of a school, college, university infrastructure to provide education uh, may become a more hybrid model where you could have peer-to-peer learnings and learnings from small groups, and social learning might gain more traction, right? And that is something which is still not a very formalized setup, but I believe there will be some effort happening in that space, which also formalizes a learning from a certain peer. For example, someone who's a expert in a certain domain, and is teaching about 10 students in a particular discipline. How does that get recognized overall? So it may not happen still today, but I believe there is time to come where these things might happen more and more.
Fantastic, Saurav. I greatly appreciate your inputs there. Now, let me bring in one interesting aspect. Since we are talking about content and gamification of content, and seeing that can we make the content more engaging and interesting, Prasad bhai, I'll just come to you. Just give me 1 second for this input. Uh, how many of us believe that what Froebel created toys would actually come back again as methods of learning? I'm just throwing. So what I love to do is that when you make the when you disturb the water, I like to keep throwing stones inside, saying that let's keep disturbing it so that someone will make sense out of that pattern. So when we talk about COVID and we talk about the situations, how COVID is impacting different parts of the world, different countries in different perspective, it's quite interesting to see what UK has to come up with within 6 months, a complete different perspective on how they would look at the whole situation. And from what I get to hear, there is a whole bag of professionals sitting ready, a whole bunch of professionals sitting ready who want to just stop learning online. They say, that's it. Now, please bring us some stuff where we meet you face to face. And it becomes a challenge. So when we talk of these interesting things, I would like all of us to stop for a minute and ponder on this point that can we identify for our own startup in context of our own region that we have identified? I'm sure we have done that little bit. If we have not, of course, we'll be looking at those aspects. But if we have identified a market that we want to be in, uh, there could be completely different two markets which behave completely differently for us. And for those two different markets, can we identify two completely different trends that are sweeping? One could be human trend. The second could be a business trend. What I mean by business is, can we disrupt business models? It's happened is in majority of industries. Education is on the cusp of disruption of that nature, where we could completely disrupt a business model. Now, universities is a business model, according to me. Will university be disrupted? Of course, there's no right wrong here, and we don't want to create too much of turbulence more than required. But let's say if we were to identify a business model that is about to disrupt our startup, what role will our startup play in disrupting that business model? So first we looked at the human trend, and are quite happy that Deepika and some of us have given human side of the challenge. And now I'm posing the next one. What kind of a business model disruption are we going to look at from in context of our startup in the region that we have identified? Yes, Prasad bhai, I can come to you. In the meantime, our other friends can just ponder on it. If you find it more challenging, don't worry. It is not so easy. If it was, then of course we would have everyone cracking the mystery every day of a startup. So what we want to do is that let's look at our startup and see that what kind of a business model will it disrupt? Will it disrupt a traditional coaching business model? Will it disrupt an existing most advanced AI-based Khan Academies model? Because and we have a freedom to do that, because any model right now that was created yesterday can be disrupted today. So let's take a minute while Prasad Bhai addresses his points. and see what kind of business model do we want to disrupt, and can we disrupt it in a completely multiple ways. By the way, there's no one business model. There could be multiple business models that we may want to disrupt. Yes, Prasad bhai, let's hear you.
It's just to add on to what Saurav said. Democratization of learning, which has been the one key disruption which is happening across, right? Which is you don't need to really be, thanks to internet and thanks to open source. So open source and internet has paved a way. In fact, big ones like MITs and everyone has come up with their own open learning, because most of the learning is free. You don't need to pay for it, right? What you need to pay for it is the coaching and the experience and the mentoring and the direction which you're going to get and perspectives you're going to get, right?
Excellent.
That's what you're paying for, right?
Excellent.
Not paying for anymore. The cost of the content is a zero, right? So if your IP is cost of the content, then it is going to disrupt it very quickly, right?
Excellent.
So you cannot keep that as an IP anymore.
Excellent point there. Now, what Prasad bhai has mentioned, and I would appreciate his point from a perspective that he's actually shook the entire crucible that we were trying to throw stones in, because what he's trying to say is that when we look at disruption, it could be having a tremendous amount of diverse impact on different education verticals. And things cannot be taken for granted in that context. So thank you, Prasad bhai. Let's now get back to our friends and say, which business models do we see getting disrupted by our startups? Just quick few examples so that others can also learn from it. And Shar, I hope you are enjoying this session, and so is our friend. I am completely out of clue how I pronounce your name. Phoger, Fogerman, or Pokemon. Of course, I don't want to call that, but
I'm Manu Francis.
Yeah, I hope you are enjoying the discussion and trying to get certain trends that we are talking to identify. So the first step that today what we are looking at is understand. We are in the stage of an understand, and in the stage of understand, we are trying to look at how do I make sense of my startup in context of the knowledge funnel. And in the knowledge funnel, we are saying that there is a lot of mystery out there, and can we create those mystery into a heuristic? So saying that I want to launch a business in so and so domain. So let me try and figure out what are the kinds of human, business and technology trends. I'm not focusing too much on technology here because all of us are tech driven in that extent. And the first starting Avinash ji shared was a tech aspect of what we are looking at. But I'm trying to focus on the human and the business model angle to it. So would you want to give some perspective here, friend?
So actually, I'm not getting any points.
No worries.
Thinking,
okay, let's take it, make it. That's exactly why I asked you. Is because when we talk about startups, there are on one hand people with a lot of experience, people with a lot of understanding of the industry coming in, and sometimes we see a problem or a possibility, and people like you would want to address that at your level. So let's begin from there. In your domain that you have selected as a problem or a possibility, which is the trend, the human trend that you think is really going to impact?
So actually, I think students are not liking their college or the formal education is not accepted by the students.
Excellent.
It's a point where we can catch.
Excellent. So what you're saying is that millennials challenge everything, and they would not. And
they don't want to waste so much of time for this study and other stuff.
Excellent.
They want to get in the fastest possible time.
Greatly appreciate that, because what you're trying to say is the learning aspect of children and the reason for learning, as well as so why should I learn, what should I learn, how should I learn, all that, where should I learn, with whom should I learn, all those are getting challenged by the millennials, and of course beyond millennials now. So in that context, let's hear from some of our friends on the business disruptions that our startups are going to look at. Or let me add one more simpler thing. Um, if we were to learn something for our startup from a completely different industry, which one would we want to choose to look at? Okay, let me make it easier, because some of us may be still thinking that what is happening here, those of you joined a little late. Uh, uh, what we are talking about, cracking the mystery, which is the world around us. All of us have identified EdTech as a mystery domain that we want to focus on. Now, looking at EdTech as a mystery, we have tried to identify a problem or a possibility area that we want to address. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that while we look at this mystery domain of EdTech that we have selected, how do we make sense out of it? So we are trying to understand what kind of trends are sweeping the world, both locally as well as globally, in context of the human, which may be a student, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be an policymaker. What kind of trend is going to sweep all of them? One. Second, what kind of business trend is going to sweep the world? So, for example, when Amazon said on, was it Amazon? I think, Deepika, you'll have to help me out. The day the news came out that we are getting into food delivery business, imagine what happened in the offices of Swiggy and Zomato. One sentence can cause a kind of disruption and the pace at which people work would change to that extent. Now, that's what I call when I say business model innovation or disruption for a different industry. So let's now look at our own startups again and identify one key parameter or a business model that we think, like one of our friends, I think Prasad just mentioned that, or somebody was mentioning disrupting the universities. The business model of university is now gone quite traditional. Can we identify a different kind of a business model for a university? Now, that's the first thing. So do we want our startup to disrupt that kind of a zone? One. Second, if we were to look at any other sector and bring that kind of a disruption to our sector, what would we be looking at? Will we look at Tesla from Elon? We would look at Samsung and the way they cracked the mobile phone, smartphone industry thing. Would we look at an FMCG brand and say, how did they crack the last puzzle? Do we look at Netflix and how did they crack the situation? Where would we want to take a reference from? Yes, friends. Anyone open to? And so what we'll try to do is I'll now share with you something that in order to, for some of us who are visually inclined, we have been more vocal right now and sound inclined. Let's go to visually inclined friends. This is what we are trying to solve. And this is what we are trying to solve. This is the similar representation, but in a different way. What we are trying to say here is doing the right things and doing the thing right. Right now, I would consider when we are at a pre-MVP stage, we are into the phase of doing the right things, which means that from this mystery, which is the EdTech, you have identified a small cluster here, which is your space that you are addressing. But as you see, there are other three. So I want us to also look at those other three in the same EdTech space that you have identified. What could be a different model, that business model that we can disrupt? And with the similar kind of offering, can we have something unique? That's what I'm trying to derive at today. So let's hear Avinash Pai, please.
Okay. All right. So one of the things I was thinking is traditional university model is you have typical courses, and once you get the admission, you are stuck there until you finish your 3, 4, 5 year degree, right? So what I'm thinking after listening to all these things, is there a way to, we do the best of the courses in different universities? Okay. Okay, and we build kind of like an aggregator kind of thing, wherein some university is good in some particular AI, some university is good in something else, and somebody who wants to do things, they will have a freedom of doing it anywhere, whatever the best of the breed kind of thing, and still pursue their degrees and whatever they want to pursue.
Excellent.
I think that those are the ones Avinash, Udemy and others are doing. They're cherry picking topics and subjects from different, right? And people are not bothered about certifications anymore, because I used to work in Microsoft for many years. In the last few years, we never bothered about hiring people with certification, right? Even though there's a huge certification business around there for Microsoft. So I think that's one of the model. Nobody is going to believe a certification, right? People are getting into the mindset of making and doing much early, right? And the immediate gratification the children are having today, they need bite-sized stuff, right? and
Yeah.
even when they're coming to the work, right? Because I do hire a lot of fresh grads, right? So we have seen a huge change in the way in which they manage the work versus how we used to manage the work, right? So
Yes.
their immediate gratification is one, and of course, they don't believe in certifications.
Yes, excellent points there. And of course, some of us who are little keen to read a little more on that domain, our good friend Daniel Goleman, the father of emotional intelligence, has come out with an interesting book. It's now, of course, a popular one called Focus, which is one of the key aspects missing all across. How can we bring focus to any specific aspect? So friends, let's stop here for a minute. What we were trying to do here, and let me contextualize the first part of our program here, since we have roughly about 40 more minutes to spend, and I would call it half an hour to spend with some question answers thrown in between. So what I was trying to bring out here is are trying to create, or we have created, the ones that are able to move fast from the mystery to the code will be the ones that can succeed much faster. Now, what does that mean? It means that at every level, we have iterated ourselves against the expected iteration for that stage. For example, if we have identified very well the customer job to be done, what is the kind of problems that we are solving? What are the real pain points? What are the gains that are expected beyond the pain points? And one of the very key aspects that I normally love to ask every startup the first time is our service and must have, or that is absolute essential, or is our service good to have? On a scale of must have and good to have, if this is 10 and this is 0, I mean, there's reason I'm saying it's 0. So a must have and good to have, on a scale of 10 to 0, where will we put our startup service or offering or a product? Now, the moment we raise this kind of a question, I'm sure, and you should please, Archit, would request that if you can also contribute a little, but also think what I just said. Can you share with us, where do you think your startup solution lies? Is it absolute essential? People will not be able to live without it, or it's good to have?
Hi, sir. I'm sorry I could not participate earlier. I joined a little late. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my business model. We are a startup which provides financial skill development. We are building niche skills for professionals in alternative investment industry like hedge funds, private equity, etc. So essentially, I was just saying, seeing people are saying that certifications are dying. So I would agree to that a little bit. But the problem is that it depends on industry and the age group also. So especially in finance, we require a government recognized certification to get a job. So what we're doing is that we are tying up with AICTE and SEBI to provide recognized certificates in this area.
Yes.
So
Excellent.
so I would say that, if you ask me this question on a scale of 10 to 1, I would say that this is like an 8 because a lot of youngsters are coming in this industry of private equity hedge funds and they need to get recognized to get jobs. And but the problem that I'm trying to solve is that youngsters are only coming to do these certifications for a job. They don't think that they can use that skill to build something in future for their own or to build a startup that way. So,
Excellent.
so we're just trying to convert that.
Excellent. So within the same space of solution, you have two different business models that can actually emerge. Many, but here I can clearly see two which are striking out, and which means that when we talk about taking ourselves from mystery to a code, we are trying to at each level develop certain competencies on the way. From what Archit said, I would look at heuristic and him saying that out of these four things mentioned there, I have cracked two of them, where I'm very clear that there is a clear for certification and not for certification kind of segments, leading to a completely different two areas, but it could have the same knowledge source as a common knowledge source, which gets built upon in a different way. Uh, so very quickly, thanks, Archit, because you quickly cracked that in your few sentences. Now, what I want to derive from till we meet next time in the next master class is that can all of us basically focus on the mystery and the heuristic side. We'll not worry about algorithm and code. We'll come to that soon during our program. But the mystery and heuristic side, can we iterate the same against, just give me a second, against some things like these. So when we say understanding of the sector, industry, organization, or stakeholders, our own understanding of the sector we're getting in, industry, organization, and stakeholders, from the context of when I use the word trend, I'm using it very specifically because the moment we say trend, it makes us think about what is the kind of trend that is sweeping EdTech, education as such, specific domain of education that we have identified, and specific stakeholders when we look at. Now we are able to contextualize it more because I'm breaking it down into specifics. Is there trends that can be identified, both local, regional, and global, can at each of these four levels? Okay, having said that, further dwelling upon things like what role with the changing pedagogy will play. And this is an interesting question for all of us as educationists to think about and ponder that is it that we follow a specific approach or a pedagogy, or is it that we'll need to evolve our own approach based on the need of the specific stakeholder that we are trying to address? Many a time when I go to address, there's a big group that says for rote learning and against rote learning, and it's become a very popular debate because many times we bash the other side saying that rote learning is not good. But when in United States policy making, when they brought about what role does rote learning play, they said, let's also give it an important significance like the countries in India have done and produced some fantastic engineers and managers. So having said that, what kind of a pedagogy, what kind of an approach will our startup like to focus upon till we meet next time? So I'm leaving with you with these questions to ponder upon. Is our understanding about these four broad areas and our understanding of human, technology, and business trends, patterns, practices. I mean, you can name as you may want to coin them. You can look at what trends will sweep our startup domain, what human technology business, what kind of patterns am I recognizing in terms of human technology and business, what kind of best practices I would want to focus upon. So this was the first part, friends. And now let's quickly dwell into the second part. The second part that I wanted to focus upon is I want all of us to use this, some of the things I'm giving here as a litmus test to iterate upon. Jinu, you are quiet for some time. We would wish to hear some perspective from you too. And so is Adarsh. I'm sure you're grasping quite a bit of this, but would look at your contribution to some extent.
You told I'm listening, but I have not got anything to say and just keep quiet.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so we will interact more soon. So when I say these, of course, I cannot just tell you that identify these trends and practices and patterns. I need to give you some direction. So after this session, I'll share some of this, and these are compilations from across the world, the kind of things that are sweeping the academic fraternity. It could be at pre-K, it could be K to 12, it could be higher education, it could be continued education. These are some of the trends that I could identify. These are just suggestive. I want you to look at these and maybe they'll trigger some interesting questions. In fact, one of the key interesting questions that I wish also to think about is the role of power in the education sector. When we talk about democratizing education, what on the other hand are the power or what are the kind of politics? When I say politics, I'm not meaning by politics of nations, I'm talking about politics of academics. Is there a kind of situation which we will have to be aware of before we launch our startups, which deals with power in politics? And when I say this, because I'm also interchangeably involved with teaching assignments with institutions like IIMS, NID, and IIT, when I talk about politics, some of you who have been academicians will understand me very well. Where am I coming from in terms of power and politics in academics? Yes, I think Swarup has something to add to it. Yes, please.
Right, sir. I just wanted to add to that the question which you, the point which you just mentioned about the politics and academics. I believe it's also a very, it is also a factor which is which affects business at its root level, right? I mean, it's less the politics of doing business. I mean, no matter if we can have probably the best or the worst solution. I mean, end of the day, because most of the businesses, I believe, especially the sector which I'm in, it's a B2B, right? And in B2B, it is that politics plays a significant, or let's say some factor in securing if we can get that contract or if we cannot get that contract or who gets it. So I think it's a very relevant thing which you mentioned. And the beautiful part of it is this is probably the first of those master classes where it's been addressed openly, right? Which means that yes, for your business, your startup, your venture, your idea to succeed and get from a paper to a pilot to a MVP, you have to understand that factor, and that is very, very critical. So thank you for bringing it up.
No, I greatly appreciate that. That's why I said that people who are little familiar with academics would definitely want to take that first address that and then tell us what to do. Because rest everything becomes insignificant sometimes. So greatly appreciate. These are again some of the things I would want all of us to look at. These could be interesting insights, compilations from across the world, specifically for the EdTech space. The last one on the chart is something that many of us want to address multiple times. Many times we realize that learning has remained very, very template based to only the second level of why is being addressed. So what I mean by that is, if we talk about any concept and say that ask a student or any participant that why would you want to choose that, and if once he says why, the first why, I ask him the second why on the answer that he's giving. For example, if I ask someone that what do you really love in business, somebody may say, oh, I love neuromarketing, and I'll say, okay, why do you love neuromarketing? And the moment I get the second answer, they'll say, oh, it's very popular, no, rising trend, rising field in the world. So say, okay, now, why do you think it is the rising field? That's the third why stumps people. So what I wish also, therefore I gave this example here, that as we are in an EdTech sector, it becomes an interesting responsibility of us to also look at some of the very fundamentals and age-old practices in education and the purpose of the education that we are trying to deliver. So at one end, when we talked of politics and power, at the other end, I also want to look at the purity with which the education and outcomes are to be mapped. Okay. Having said that, let's move on. Now, this is some of you who would be keen. I'm sure you would have looked at some of the key people and some of the key books in this sector. One of the good ones is, of course, I look up to it quite a bit of time. It's from a Harvard professor, Tony Wagner, called The Global Achievement Gap. Along with that, I would recommend an interesting book by Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind. Is another very interesting one for EdTech people. Besides, of course, Simon Sinek's publications, and of course, Sir Ken Robinson's books that he has come about. So those are some of the contemporary. The reason of sharing all this was that from our startup perspective, are we able to understand the mystery to certain level? Now let's come to the next step of heuristic. The moment we say that we want to move from mystery to heuristic, what we are saying is, how do we approach our startups to decode the mystery and create some heuristic? So here are some simple things. Many of you must have have some exposure to government consulting or sectoral projects would know what as is means. To make it easy, as is nothing but as is. So a sector as is today. What your startup will do is it will make it to be. I hope you're following me what I'm saying. First part is as is. Today, this whole ecosystem as is has problems and possibilities. When our startup idea will come in, it will become to be. So before we get into to be, let's look at how do we address the second part. The first was mystery. The second part is how do we address the heuristic part. So I would wish each of us to create our own understanding of these. And when I say understanding, this is, of course, I would wish that in our circle, we have at least one or two of these when we discuss about our startups. So, and when I say one or two of these in our circle, I mean you have a very close circle of people who you constantly bounce your ideas with. And I want these stakeholders, definitely 8 of them, to be in your list. Who would be those 8 key stakeholders that you want to bounce your ideas with in context of creating your startups, taking it from a mystery stage to the heuristic stage? So can we list some of these? Of course, if it was a longer masterclass, we would have finished this in the session itself and seen the fun, because when you see the variety of people suggesting their stakeholders that they want to focus on for their startup, how diverse they can be within the EdTech sector from one to the other startup. So my request that if some of you are going to take this seriously as a stepwise approach to building the startup, then please next time come up with your own top 8 stakeholders that you think are going to make an impact to your startup and could be your inner circle, in which we are also saying that your customer segment should be there and of course the user should be there. Okay. Beyond that, I'm just giving a hygiene for what all these terms mean. So later on, you can look at it when I share the presentation. But I also want you to look at this. Can we categorize our key stakeholders into broadly these 3 categories? Can we clearly articulate who are our target stakeholder? Now, sometimes, please don't misunderstand, sometimes the user may not be in the target. Now, can anyone help me with that? Where is it that sometimes you are saying that my user is this, but he or she is not really target, he or she is in the connected space? Yeah, not too difficult to crack, but I want to hear at least one answer.
Sir, perhaps could be parents of students. They are not the primary users.
Yes, yeah. Excellent. Now for a B2B, it's even more challenging. Now when we have a startup which is both B2B and B2C, it makes it even more interesting that who is in B2B the other B for us. Now that's an interesting question from a EdTech startup perspective. Is a principal the B2B, the B on the other side, or is it the trustee who is the B on the other side? Who is the alpha and who's going to be the other one? These kind of questions, unless if we are addressing it at an elementary level right now and iterating and putting in place, it makes things very easy for building our startups. These are fundamentals, because when we talk about target, connected, and influence, the ones that would be very clear on these are my stakeholders 8. I want to keep them in my core group. This is how the 8 are. This is the target. This is connected and influence. And mind it, when we change the business model, they may change. Sometimes the influencers may become targeted in a business model where we want to earn out our revenues through different sources. Connected may become a targeted in a situation where our business model is addressing a parent. And all this changes with the way we see our startups earning money. So therefore, what I normally prescribe is that all of us should not have one business model. A business model should always be based on the customer or the target, connected, and influence. Clarity of this should derive our business model. The moment I change the target, of course, the model changes. The moment I change a business model, I want to earn not from people, from participants. I want to earn from advertising. The whole model flips. Therefore, it is very interesting to look at this diagram in context of both the business model as well as the actual users and stakeholders. So I want us to ponder before we meet again on this is the second aspect. Now we are getting into heuristic, no? Because mystery we have cracked a bit through our understanding. Now we're saying heuristic means let's begin straight with stakeholders and categorize them based on the business we are going to do into these. Okay, the key lies in this. And now I would like you to appreciate a quick video. And the reason I'm showing this video is there are certain assumptions that we make for centuries, which actually get flipped on their head simply by a simple observation that we can bring to our startup. So when we talk of this, what I mean by it is, first let's see the video and appreciate, and then we'll have a quick discussion. So here it is. I hope you'll be able to see and hear. Let me know if you can hear too.
About 10 years ago, we got approached by one of the largest oral healthcare companies in America, a company you've probably heard of called Oral-B. And they said, look, we'd like a new kid's toothbrush because ours is starting to get commoditized. It looks like a lot of kids' toothbrushes out there, and you can't have that. We want to be special, right? So we say, okay, we'll do this. We want to go out in the field and do some field research. And they're kind of not sure about that. Like, it's not rocket science. We're talking about kids brushing their teeth. How hard could that be, right? They would really like us to stop fooling around and start designing, right? But we want to go through this process, this observation process, because we think almost always you can spot opportunities. And so we go out, and we're on like the first day of observations, and we make a small discovery. The small discovery we make is that every kid's toothbrush in the history of the world has had the same implicit assumption. It's a logical assumption, it just isn't exactly right, which is the assumption always was parents have big hands, kids have small hands, and so when you want to make the kids' version, make it like the parents' brush, only smaller and skinnier. Perfectly logical until you go out in the field, until you actually watch humans, little tiny humans, brushing their teeth. And what you notice right away, you get a 5-year-old boy brushing his teeth, he's not holding his toothbrush in his fingertips the way mom and dad do, he's fisting it. He's holding it like this because he doesn't have the dexterity, he doesn't have the fine motor controls that his parents have, and so he's got to hold it like this. In fact, the other thing he does is he holds the brush too far up very frequently, and so he's punching himself in the face as he's trying to brush his teeth, and we solved that problem too. But the main thing was, came back in the field and said, uh-oh, kids don't need little skinny toothbrushes, kids need big fat toothbrushes, right? Let's make them big fat squishy toothbrushes. And you may have noticed, now every toothbrush company in the world makes these, but our client reports that after we made that little tiny discovery out in the field, sitting in a bathroom watching a 5-year-old boy brush his teeth, they had the best-selling kids' toothbrush in the world for 18 months. So when you think about power, when you think about, credibility, if you could go out in the field and do that observation and come up with that finding, and your company, your organization was the best in its field for 18 months afterwards, would that be worth it? I think that would be worth it. And so that's this message about think like a traveler, be an anthropologist, use your powers of observation, have that part of your brain turned up as high as you can all along.
Okay. So I find this quite interesting most of the time I see. Coming back, for our startups, what is it that we have an insight? And I'm sure the insight, don't misunderstand insight at only the user level. And like Swarup was mentioning, insight can also be at a bureaucratic level. Insight can also be at a power game level. Insight can also be at a buying behavioral level. So depending on, can we look at insight that, and I want now you to, for some of us to come up with. Now, I'm sure what you saw here is interesting because for over 100 years, I mean, more than a century, we were working on a different assumption. And so all the toothbrushes that were made were small, thin, because thinking that children are small. That assumption turned around the industry. And yeah, somebody has put a spotlight on others. So yeah, Karan, can you help me? Because I can't do anything about it. But he's been made a startup to look up to. So on a lighter note. So yeah, coming back, let's quickly discuss, friends, what according to, it can't even be me, you can actually put all of us in the spotlight. Let's hear from our friends. Yes.
Yes, I would like to share some of the opportunities I got to talk with the actual customers of my startup. So yes. I am an incubator of AIC SKU, Atal Incubation Center, SK University. Since it is operating in the university, so there is a skill development center here. Yes. So due to COVID, there are many students who are coming to this skill development center, and I happened to spoke to few of them, and I asked them which branch you belong to. So they said we are belonging from BA, so Bachelor of Arts. They are coming to learn Python. There is already a huge competition in the skill center for the BTech students from all the branches, but still they are also coming. Then I asked, why are you coming, which is alien to you? Like, why are you want to learn? They said, ma'am, due to this corona, we don't have any other opportunity, job opportunities available there. So we thought if we can learn this skill, we may get into the job. So that is their idea of joining the skill center. Then I asked, why don't you have some skills of your own, or you can learn some other alternative or extracurricular skills which has the potential to create or to build the career out of it? They said, madam, we don't have any other opportunity here except this skill center. Why? I asked, ma'am, we don't have the experts availability here. We cannot travel. So there I identified there is a huge skill gap, as well as there is no platform which can fill this gap and give the skills to the students.
Excellent. Excellent. So good point there. And do pass my good wishes to Shiv Karanji as well as Chandramouli Bhai. Good friends
Thank
there.
you so much, sir.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
thank
good
you, sir.
friends
I
there.
will definitely.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you, sir.
a very good point there that you've brought about. Let's hear two of our other friends. Prasad is excited to share something, and so was, I think, yeah, please, Prasad Bhai, go ahead.
I think the power of observation, so I can't agree anymore on that, right? So when we were doing our pilot batches, we thought there need to be a lot of instruction for children when they want to do something. So we had overboarded on instruction on a workbook, right, which is giving them step by step on what to do. For all of us surprising, we had only 2 children out of 300 children looked up the workbook. Because most of the children, it was an absolute, they don't need to be instructed, right? Especially they know that tell us what to do, tell us why to do, and leave it to us how we want to do, right? So it's an important assumption, saying so instead of building a workbook, which we thought very essential, we thought that's very essential for children to be instructed. So that and absolutely it was an assumption which got really validated very quickly because of observation, saying that nobody touched that workbook.
Fantastic. So, friends, what Prasad Bhai and what we heard from our other friend is for all of our startups, when we talk about the heuristic stage, can we look at some of these insights that are hidden in different domains? Some will be key insights, like we heard, that our entire business will be based on that insight. But somewhere it will be an insight that will help our startup succeed faster. Those insights can come from decision makers, that if we look at our stakeholders and each of them and observe them differently and find out certain status quos that are present, like in this case, when we talked about the toothbrush, we saw the status quo was a kind of toothbrush till someone came up and understood that, oh, we have got a wrong assumption here. So what I wish all of us as startups to do is create assumptions around insights for different stakeholders. And these can come from, like rightly shared by our friend Prasad, that it can come through keen observation. It can come through observation. It can sometimes come through insight. Presented, some of you even keen on generating ideas in future. You can look up to a book called Where Good Ideas Come From, Stephen Johnson. And what it says is that sometimes the best of the startups actually succeed by clashing of ideas from different part of the world. Having said that, if you looked at in my stakeholder list, I have categorically put few people there. I put government there. I put subject expert there. Sometime it may be interesting to take a completely diverse group of these interesting stakeholders and get an insight from them. Because when we are within the system, sometimes we take things for granted and don't question those. Now, having said that, of course, I'm happy to share that if we are keen, we can look at somebody like Elon Musk's principle. He calls it the first principle first. So when we have to make a rocket, you don't go to NASA to see what NASA is doing. You go to the dictionary and say, what does rocket mean? What has been the history of rocket? And then I do not get constrained by what is happening around me. I look at the things through a fresh eye of my own understanding, which what Prasad Bhai and one of our friends shared, that was their own experience. When they looked at the situation, it is that experience that gave them that view. That is the fresh mindset with which we want to take up. So since we have a couple of minutes now, we'll open to question. But in this session, of course, you will find, like Prasad was saying, that I have, like usually happens, I have also a workbook, which I'll of course share with you, which will take you through these points that I need to look at each one of this and address each one. But broadly, today we were talking about mystery and heuristic. And when I talk about mystery and heuristic, I'm looking at a mystery and trying to understand it through interesting ways. The ways that we are trying to understand that, do I look at human, business, and the technology trends that are sweeping? It could be trends, it could be best practices, it could be patterns. Which of these I want to leverage? Now, when I say which of these I want to leverage means I want to piggy bank for next 6 months, I may leave it. And then I'll say, okay, I'll switch on to something else. That's what an intelligent startup founder should do, because piggy bank on what is available, what is ready at hand. So understanding those trends, then looking at our stakeholders and identifying 8 key stakeholders from different perspectives. It could be perspective of my target audience, it could be connected, it could be influence. The moment I change my business model, the whole thing flips. The parent becomes the target and the child becomes connected. And when I'm focusing on the certain higher education, it flips in the other way. It may flip completely if I want to take up an organization and say, you provide the money for training people whom I'll train, and then I'll give you 50% of them. You select the best. The whole model flips from influenced becomes the target and target becomes the influenced. Now think about it. I'm just leaving you with these interesting thoughts. Because many a time startups are looked at that there is only one business model, there is only one right that we are doing it. I don't think that's correct. There are 20 rights, there are 20 business models. Unless we have explored these 20, it will not become obvious which one should be the apt one that can give us the first rupee, if that is our objective. I mean, most of my time I say that my first customer and my first rupee is what I'm excited about. We'll follow the 10,000 later, but let's begin with the first rupee and the first customer. So in this slide was mystery and heuristic. Now open to question, and I'll also share the further slides so that you don't get nervous when you see them later. They're nothing but iteration for assumptions that we have made for each of these that you see. These are certain for education sector, some things to really look upon to. For initiatives, interventions for education, have we iterated upon this and found certain best practices, trends, patterns, insights from these, like we found from stakeholders? Some frameworks that you can actually use in order to get insights and dig deeper. So some things, and then of course, as I said, a workbook checklist that we can come up with for our startup. So we stop here, friends, and look forward to a few questions and yeah, or views. I mean, they're not just questions, but perspective, views, opinions. Let's hear some, friends. Yeah, I'm a little sorry for today in the sense that I took an approach which is quite contrary to a master class. Master class is generally considered as a master and class. I thought there are 20 masters here and there is a platform that is on. I think that's the best way to look at a startup. So open to questions and views, friends. If not questions, views. Let each one of us speak a line about our takeaway from today.
Yes, sir. Like my takeaway would be like, first of all, I thought it would be a very typical master class. So I thought I would really get bored, but contrary to that, like it was very interesting and very curious. Like there are many things that provoked me to think more about my startup. And today, like I really liked this human approach and business approach. Now I would want to implement and implicate these two aspects to my startup, and that is my learning today, sir. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely a pleasure. Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, please, friends. Yeah. So Karan has already floated a feedback, but I think that's more a formal feedback. I would like a subjective one. So quickly, one takeaway that we take from this masterclass till we catch up in the next. Yeah, please, just whoever grabs the mic first.
Yeah, well, right. What I think is you just given us a different angle to look at the things. Like we typically go with the customer survey and from that approach, but taking it from a different industry and trying to see if this is applicable to our industry or our startup. And I think that's my taking. It's just to see beyond what sector you are in.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, friends.
Hi.
Thank you, Agnashri. Yeah.
So Naya here.
Yes, Naya.
Yes. My takeaway would be like, having you telling us that there can be two different business models to the EdTech thing rather than just looking at one business model. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Not two, I would say have as many and then choose which part of your business startup life cycle would you want to implement which business model. Wouldn't that be interesting? So that when you have competition, you are ready for your next business model.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Yes, guys, just grab the mic quickly.
Hello.
Run out of time. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Soumitra. I
Yes,
found your that insight and assumption part very interesting. Generally, we don't challenge our assumptions and we go with like, I know this is right and I think this is the solution. But surveys do help, but bringing in insights would help a startup a lot.
Yeah. No, that is, I think, at the heart. What you spoke is the heart of what we call a value proposition, because a value proposition is a key insight on which our startup is based. What I did try to do was I just extrapolated that, saying that not just look at just the user, let's look at every aspect of the business that we will do, and can we get an insight, like the example of if you go to a school to sell something, is it the trustee who buys, or is it the principal who buys, or is it the house leader who buys? I don't know. I just don't know. We'll have to challenge ourselves to these kind of assumptions and then getting insights from there. Yes, Swarup, please.
Right, sir. So for me, it was overall very good in terms of setting the perspective, because many a times you see that you think what could be needed, and then you go into building the solution, and then the whole story is about the solution trying to find a problem. What we learned here is setting the perspective that think of the as is and the to be, and that example of that kid's toothbrush is a perfect setting, saying you might have an idea of what it should be, but until you actually go and talk to some of these people, understand how it is happening today, what the problems are, the solution might never work, and it may never solve actually any issue for or a problem for anyone, right? So I think those were the very key and critical learnings from today, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you, Saurav. I would categorize that into data behind us and data in front of us. So the big data and the small data. The big data is the data I call data behind us, which we used for a major part of COVID thing. But we finally realized that it is the rich data in front of us, which tells us which places to isolate, how to isolate individuals and how to isolate places so that we can actually fight such a situation. So the big and small data, so many of us, what today I was trying to emphasize is small data, our own understanding of the domain, not a surveyed understanding of domain. Like Saurav said, when we have a surveyed understanding, we try to fit in the solution to anyhow we fit into a problem and justify to ourselves and keep justifying to others for at least 6 months to 2 years till we realize it's not working. But why is it not working? There is an insight behind which has not been looked at. There is assumption that we have not made correctly, or there is a hypothesis that is not going correct. So my request would be that as startups, let's create hypotheses and assumptions for who our stakeholders are at different levels. What is our business model looking like? What is our core product? Sometimes that assumption on core product or service offering is also completely skewed, like we saw in the toothbrush. Can we challenge that ourselves? But at least let's create those assumptions and hypotheses. Once we create that, we will challenge. Yeah, thank you, Saurav, for setting that tone. Yes, Prasad bhai, looking forward to, you have some interesting views. So I would be looking forward to
I'm quite happy that some of our views aligned a lot, because I had an opportunity to meet David Kelly in person. So I was in Stanford for a few months with him. We were working on a design for one of our product lines in Microsoft. So I'm a big fan of these thinking. So that's why I took a plunge. Still, I've not reached India. So I'm in UK. So we have started something in India. This is the purpose is be built from India for the world. So that's our
excellent.
Purpose. Yeah.
Good to hear that somebody saying that it'll be interesting to interact with you, because when we 10 years back did a project which was the first Indo-China animation film by children, done by children, it became made in India for the rest of the world kind. And no, for doing that for China, it's like it gives us a pride. But I would look forward to your initiative, because it could bring in global best practices to India in a way that we can address it back to the world. Amazing. Thank you for that. Yes, few more, and then of course, friends.
Hi, I'm Archit here. I liked your idea of, in the heuristics, like from how to move from heuristics to code. That is very important for any business model, whether you have 1 or 2 or 10. And, that concept is where I think I should focus on that. So that was a good taking.
Oh, excellent. And in fact, just to add to that, Archit, it could be code is not just the core product or service. A code can also be how we market it. A code can also be that how our financial model is created. A code will also be what kind of a team should we have. So it is at every level. It's at so we'll pick that up the next time and see that how do we go from heuristic. But right now we're moving from mystery and heuristic, and with some of the exercises I'm sharing with you, if you can please spend some time and do those, I'm sure it will bring more clarity on the startups and maybe open new avenues for us.
Yes, of course. I think, and that's important, like, because even when we are at the mystery stage, like as you said, it's very important to clear our assumptions. So when we do that activity, we should also see that what like the resource which we're using, is it dependable or not? Like, instead of doing just a survey, just do a paid ad or a landing page, which can help us get a more reliable feedback as compared to an unreliable feedback.
Excellent. Excellent. That's being lean and agile. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. So, Karan, would you want to step in, and Deepika, looking forward to, yeah.
Great. I think I'll ask Deepika to just share her some concluding notes on the complete session, and then probably we'll end this.
Okay, you were able to hear me. So fantastic session. I think Rohit, definitely so much to think and ponder upon, and specifically, I particularly liked how you started the entire session with thinking about trends and specifically aligning that to human element. I think that's something that I'm gonna take back. And then I think it gave a structure also to the entire thinking, because from the trends we started into business model disruption, how it converts into a knowledge funnel, and then overall how are we thinking about building an idea. So I loved it particularly. I would love to hear maybe any, so think of this as a safe space, right? When I say safe space, honest feedback is invited. We want to improve, we want to make it better. So if there's something that didn't work for you, if there's something more that we should be thinking about, if the structure of the session did not work better for you, or maybe the timeline was something which was restrictive, or maybe longer rather, share those ideas with us. I think we want to hear from you, and this is for the EdTech community. So if it's not helping you, we got to make it better. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Deepika, for those insights. And I would like to thank all of you for spending time with us and being an attentive audience for this masterclass. Thank you so much, Rohitji, for sharing those insights and those lovely, nuggets of thoughts with our startups. And definitely, we look forward to the next masterclass in the coming time. Right. So have a great evening, everyone, and a lovely weekend to all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good wishes to each one. And please stay safe, and let's catch up next time. But please don't let the hour go as a masterclass and it's over. I think now it is where it begins, because I'm going to share the worksheets. So looking forward to actually seeing some work being done on those worksheets. That's when we will see that we have succeeded as a team here.
Fantastic. And Rohit, just a last question. These worksheets need to be submitted via email, or will we
Yes.
discuss this in the next class?
Yeah, what we can do is we can discuss it in the next class so that it brings a cross-learning perspective. Otherwise, you are getting an opinion only from one, myself. Now here you'll have opinion from 20 different startups.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Pleasure.